Welcome to the Lead and Learn Lounge, the podcast for paediatric allied health professionals who want to lead with heart, purpose, and a little bit of play. We're your hosts. I'm Lauren Haskins.
And I'm Marion Giddy.
This podcast is your invitation to pull up a chair, slow things down, and join us for real conversations about what it really means to lead in paediatric practice today. We're not here to hand out expert advice or perfectly packaged solutions. Instead, we'll be sharing honest reflections, asking thoughtful questions, and exploring the things that matter. From building inclusive teams and rethinking workplace design to understanding your own leadership style.
Including if you're someone who's wired a little differently. Whether you're leading a team, leading a project, or simply leading yourself through the next stage of your career, there's something here for you.
So get comfy and let's lead and learn together. Hello and welcome to our podcast. We're so excited to be chatting all things leadership in paediatric allied health. I'm joined with my friend and colleague, Marion Giddy from CUI Speech Pathology. Hi, Marion.
Hello, Lauren. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. And yes, I'm Lauren from Let's Grow Together. And Marion and I for years have been having lots of conversations about leadership and in the space of paediatric allied health. And we wanted to share some of those conversations with our audience. We know that this is a topic that comes up in a lot of our areas. And so we wanted to share some of the conversations that we'd been having. So we wanted to start by really talking today about defining what is leadership in this paediatric allied health space. What a way to start, right?
Big topic. Yeah. But I think a great starting point, because there's so much, so many different interpretations, I think, of what can go into those words,
Yeah. And we've spoken about it behind the scenes, Marion, but when we're talking about defining leadership, what does it mean to you when we start off? I know that that's a big question in itself, but where were some of the thoughts that took you? Where did you start thinking about leadership?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that stands out to me. It's such a loaded word, isn't it? I don't know if that's been your experience, Lauren. It's definitely been mine. And I think a word like leadership or being a leader, they can be really weighty words. They certainly were for me. And a big part of my process has been kind of reconciling what are the identity structures that I've attached to that, what are the expectations that I've attached to that, and how am I measuring myself in relation to those things. And certainly that's changed over time. I've got stories about that, but I think that's probably the first point is the subjective nature of those terms. And it's easy for people to think, leadership's a really static thing, because often in our own individual meaning frames, it is fairly static, right? So I think about leadership and this is what I think of. But that's really different for every person. So everybody brings their own unique perspective into it. And I think that's part of the challenge is when we are in leadership roles, we need clarity within ourselves and also within the teams and structures we're working within to define, well, what does that look like specifically here,
It's really interesting when you said that, the word leadership, it can feel really heavy and it can feel really big. And I think you're right. But I think, certainly in my scenario, in my experience, I didn't necessarily apply for a leadership role to begin with. It's something that I kind of fell into, if you like, So I completely agree with you. I think when we talk about leadership being a role or a definition in that way, it feels really big. But I think as pediatric clinicians and as speech pathologists, it's not something that we necessarily aimed for. No one necessarily starts off wanting to be a leader in that space, but sometimes you find yourself in that leadership role.
Contextually, you're running a business, you step into supporting clinicians. And I think that's the clarification is the key change for me was when I did my NLP training, and the understanding from that is that actually leadership doesn't exist. It's not a thing. It's an abstract noun. It's a subjective meaning that each of us individually hold, which is lovely. It's great if you know what your own expectations and attachments that you're bringing are, but it doesn't exist in actual reality. What does is the act of leading, and then that's going to look different in different roles. Is that mentoring? Is it supervising? Is it innovating? Is it quality assuring processes? Is it creating procedures and actually looking at the capabilities that are involved? And that's a much more, when I think about leadership and certainly at CUI, our process of inducting people into leadership roles, it's a lot less about leadership and a lot more about the capabilities involved in the roles that they're stepping into. And I think, you're probably similar to me in these roles. I think many speech pathologists have an organic process or in allied health, not just speech pathologists, but clinicians have a organic process of naturally finding themselves in roles that are going beyond clinician-centric roles, and often they want to try new things. You sort of be a clinician for a while and then it's not true for everybody, but some people start to go, what else could I do? And it's really around exploring new capabilities and I think that's an easier way to think about it for people as well, rather than can I lead this thing or am I a leader? Because that's a much more static view.
And I think for me, and like you've touched on, for me, and it comes in the name of Let's Grow Together and my private practice, A Growing Understanding. So that growing element, and, for me, it's about learning and understanding and being a part of the process rather than it necessarily being role specific. Yeah.
I mean, I think leading is all about being in process. It's all about innovating change in some way, whether that's with people, whether it's with a project, whether it's with procedures in the clinic that you're in. It's all about being in process of change, and I think for me that's the exciting part of it as well, is being able to bring things to life and do new things and see that growth and transformation. And I think for me, that lights me up. Growth is a strong value for me. Seeking evolution and change is something that's really invigorating. And I think that's true for a lot of clinicians, because there's a huge correlation between, working with clients and seeing that growth and change. And then it's a bit of a natural transition into finding other ways to express that same value as well.
Isn't it really interesting in that space? I think in some of the social media groups and the forums that we're a part of, we see a narrative or sometimes a question come up about how many years experience does someone have before they're considered a senior clinician? Or how many, what things should people be doing before they step into a leadership role? And so I think that that's a different perspective when we're talking about defining leadership. I think that those sorts of questions and commentary comes into effect because it makes up some of the things that we talk about and discuss, but we come at it from a very different perspective. I say we come at it from a different perspective from what we've already introduced, but also you and I have different perspectives on how to lead and what
and
that looks like.
Each organisation is going to. So I think looking for kind of cookie cutter answers or approaches, like there's just not going to be a way that will be uniform across settings, across different practices, different locations, and different roles. So I would a little bit more around capabilities and the embodied understanding of what it is you're leading, rather than how many years do I have under my belt as well.
Can I ask you, what did that look like for you? What did your leadership journey look like? You mentioned some of the training that you've done, which informs how you show up as a leader now. But what do you think was your first step into, or your first realization that you were moving into leadership in this paediatric allied health space?
Well, I think it started with mentoring and supervising other clinicians. So as my business grew, I moved from a sole clinician to onboarding team members, and naturally the next thing is to sort of go, okay, well, we need to provide some clinical supervision here, and it involves a lot of mentoring. And then from there, after a few years of probably, in a very ad hoc way, the business was trying to just create some processes and figure out, so there's a procedural element to the leadership that I was required to do, and certainly a HR element to the leading as well came on board. And then I think from there, it sort of moved from that mentoring HR processes space into needing to skill myself to lead the business as the business was continuing to grow. And so seeking business coaching and actually, developing capabilities in strategy and prioritization and finance and understanding all of the kind of the aspects of the business that I'd been overlooking was a big part of that, called leadership journey, because it was really starting to shift my training and my skill set out of that speech pathologist scope into more of a business management scope. So there was a big period of time where that was the learning in leading was systems and structures and governance and processes and finance, and then moving on from there, just with my natural interests and also what was occurring within the team and within myself, the interest in leadership shifted into interest in personal development. And so really wanting to be able to understand myself better, lead myself better, and then also apply that within creating culture within teams. And so, in terms of the trainings along the way, there's been business coaching, there's been leadership coaching, there's been personal development coaching, there's been courses that I've accessed through for example, the SAID Business School in Leadership, and also my NLP Master Practitioner training as well was a really big piece that has informed most of the way that I show up as a leader now, is really through that lens of developmental coaching and understanding how a little bit more about how humans work and the psychology of how humans work and how personalities run and how team cultures build and create and shift. So that's very much my space at the moment. And that's where that concept of really starting to explore our own identity structures and understand capabilities and deal with capabilities as well. That's come from that NLP space, which has just been invaluable in leading. So a bit about where I am, where I got to, and who knows what's next, hey?
Yeah.
And how it works.
I think, my journey was very similar in that sense. That when I was working for the Public Health Service, I started off as a junior clinician, and I had incredible hands-on practical supervision structures in place, and had some really good mentors and supervisors and managers who I aspired to. And, I think that role modeling really set me up early on in my career to be able to see what worked well in terms of the leaders around me and what I wanted to achieve. And therefore, I was able to start stepping into roles, and it started with the supervision and mentoring of more junior clinicians, of students, more from a practical perspective, as well as, getting support from my leaders about how to implement that and do that. So how to have a student placement, how to provide supervision and support to others. and then continuing to develop those professional skills in the scope of how to provide supervision, coaching, and leadership in that space. And it was only, like you touched on, moving into business and my own private practice, that then broadened away from those professional skills of supervision, that the leadership aspects really then started to look at more of the tasks that need to go into business management and things as well, which is a huge part of when, as soon as you bring on another human into your team, you automatically default into a leadership role. But there are so many other things that you need to, factor into that equation as well. So I think my background, and I think that this is where we share some different perspectives, and not right or wrong, they're just, I know that I take a great deal of learning from your experience and training. My experience in training has been more from that professional base, and that, getting training and support in how to provide supervision and coaching and mentoring to then expand. And I'm broadening that with these sorts of conversations and learnings in that personal development space as well. And I think that those two experiences, yours and mine, I think it helps to define that leadership that little bit more. I like that idea of what you were touching on, is that idea of leading versus leadership.
And it's a really empowering position to come on, because we can get into a bit more specificity, like, well, what is the leading that's required? Is it mentoring? Is it supervising? Is it innovating, as I was saying before? And then from there, well, where am I at now in relation to developing that capability? Like there's an NLP presupposition, which I love, which is if someone can do something, it's a human possibility. And I think that meshes really beautifully with this concept of like, well, okay, well, what is the skill or the capability that, the context or this role requires? And then, we talked earlier about being in process. Well, where am I in process in relation to developing that skill? So there's a lot more humanity and openness and humility maybe in that approach, rather than am I a good enough leader? Do I have what it takes? Which is a really fixed, static mindset, and in our internal frames can be a really easy way that we judge ourselves against these kind of internal benchmarks, rather than allowing ourselves to be in process. So, everyone's going to bring their different lens, whether it's personal or professional or clinical skill sets, into their leadership roles. Everyone's going to bring different strengths, and that's the beauty of it, isn't it?
Yeah. What would your advice be? So when this topic is all about defining leadership. For somebody that may want to step into a leadership role, they may have found themselves leading a team, they may aspire to that, and it may be something that they're considering or that they're wanting to be doing more of. What advice would you have, given what we've touched on today?
I'm curious to your answer to this one. Two things come to mind actually for me, and the first one is self-leadership. So to what degree, and it's a self-reflective question, to what degree am I skilled at leading myself into new or uncomfortable areas in my own life? And I think that if that's tricky, that's a great place for us to start, because when we're leading others or leading projects or leading teams, it's the same skill set. So if shifting your own patterns, habits, or ways of showing up in the world is something that someone is still learning, that's probably the starting point, is like learn to shift your own mindsets, attitudes, and behaviors, because it's going to come into play in a leadership role. Because leadership roles are complex. They're problem-solving roles a lot of the time. And so we need a lot of flex and creativity. You're going to need to do things that challenge your skill set. So start by learning how to lead yourself through challenges.
Gosh, that's hard, Marion. That I find the personal stuff so hard. I know, and then that's exactly what you're saying. I just go, oh my gosh.
And I shared this in our team development session yesterday. Not growing is also really hard.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true.
The same lessons and having the same life lessons over and over because you're not growing is a really difficult position as well. So it's choose your hard, choose your challenge.
Choose your hard, choose your challenge. And it's also, you know, for me, it's also about being true to yourself in those self-reflections and you know, what is it that you're genuinely good at? What is it that you, where is there an opportunity to be able to grow, and being able to, consider that and to be able to be active in that process of learning and growing. And I think writing those things down.
To be able to welcome in these parts of ourselves that we find challenging, you know, and grow through that. And as I say, the humanity in that, like we all do that. We all have these blind spots and these personality challenges and unconscious biases. And that's not unique to any one of us. That's part of being human. And so, having some self-compassion in that space, but also the responsibility and the action, if you're wanting to lead, will lead.
Yeah.
You know, do something differently rather than waiting. You know, and there was a key point where I think I'd been in developmental coaching for maybe 3 months or 6 months at some point, and I was working with shifting some personal habits and patterns. Can't remember what it was, but I remember this moment where I was sitting on the couch at home and I had a realization that I was journaling and I'd been frustrated that I hadn't been able to change this particular thing. I can't remember what it was. And I had a moment where I realized that I was waiting for someone to lead me. Oh, I'm doing all the reflective parts. Oh, I'm doing this. But I was still like kind of subconsciously waiting for someone to tell me, Marion, it's time. Just go and do it. You know, just go and take the action. But there's no one there in the personal space. It's just me. So if I wanted to actually create an action, I realized I needed to lead myself. You know, and that's an easy thing to say, but the realization of it, actually getting the understanding of that is an individual process. And it's, I think it's very powerful for people when they start to go, hey, this is my responsibility. This is my ownership, and I'm going to do it, you know.
Yeah, very powerful. You said that you had a second thing that you came to mind as well.
Oh, that's what it was. It's like what you were saying before. Also exploring the things that light you up, right? Why do you love what you do? You know, you talked about what do I find tricky, but also what's my super strength? What makes me just feel great on the inside? So exploring your values, making them really conscious and explicit, understanding why your values are important to you, understanding how they limit you, you know, understanding kind of your passion in the world and that's a process. And it's not finding that out in the world, it's uncovering what already exists. Yeah. So we don't find our passions or our things outside. They're internal meanings. Again, we just have to uncover them. And I think that's a really important part of knowing yourself, is knowing your own motivations and what drives you and what you actually do want to do, what change you want to bring about if you want to lead something, because that's what leading is about. It's about creating change. So what's the platform or the sphere that uniquely for you makes you feel great about it? Because you're going to need that. You're going to need that momentum and meaning as context for all of the dull, drudgery tasks that are required to bring it to life.
Yeah. Love that.
That's my two, Lauren. What have you got?
I don't know that I've got two, but mine might be a big one, all sort of blended together because, you know, I verbalize to be able to process. So stay with me while I work my way through this. But I think for me, it's very similar to what your second point was about knowing what your goal is and what you're aiming towards. So for me, having an idea about what your end point is, you know, it might be professionally, personally, all of it, because it's all relevant, right? It's all of the different areas of your life that you're wanting to see what that end game is, and being able to really clearly see it and articulate it and to be able to document where you're wanting to head. And then to almost start where you want to finish, so you can't start anywhere until you know that end point, until you've got that big vision about where you're wanting to head and where you want to end up. So with that in mind, having that perspective, being able to document it. And in terms of that leadership space, being able to document, write down who are the leaders that you aspire to or really admire, and what are the qualities in them that make them a good leader. And as part of that process, if that's something that you're wanting to achieve, if you're wanting that to sit within your personal and professional space, what do you need to be working on personally and professionally in order to be able to get there? But I think, for me, I remember sitting in interviews and some of the interviewers were saying to me, who's someone that you aspire to, or who inspires you, or someone that you really admire? And that's a really hard question. It's a really big one. And you can give the really superficial answers, but when you really sit and reflect about, the answer to that question, I think that it brings up a lot in you about who
values exploration,
values,
right?
Exactly, like what you were talking about. What are the values that really align with your own, and that has led you to really admire that person? Why is it that they inspire you? And I think that can fit in with that big long-term plan. And then, going back to what you were saying, how can you show up and do the personal work to really reflect on how do you get there? So I think that needs to be part of that process as well. Have your goal and then work out how you're going to get there.
And I think, from what I know of you, Lauren, the conversations we've had over the years, I think that's a super strength of yours. Your capacity to vision something is so high. You've got real clarity on those endpoints. You know where you're going, and in my experience in kind of coaching and mentoring people, and certainly even in my own, that's been really tricky. So I just wanted to, I guess, highlight that for different personality types, visioning can actually be really, really hard. So, we did a team development session recently at CUI that breaks down the visioning and goal setting process into about 5 stages that each has 3 sub-steps. So it was this big procedural process. But, stage 1 was around self-awareness and around understanding your values and understanding your habits and patterns of behavior to inform then stage 2, which is visioning and goal setting and creating that vision. So I think the self-awareness piece, it is primary in then understanding how we can craft a vision that's going to be meaningful to us. And then just in that visioning space, if that is tricky for anyone that's listening, just know that that's okay, because it is a skill set, and it's just, I think, a little bit of permission to play in that space as well. And the more awareness you have of your values and what's important to you and what's difficult for you, and understanding yourself more, that's going to make that visioning process a little bit easier, but it is a process. And so playing with it and refining your process is totally okay if it doesn't come as naturally to you as well.
Yeah, I really like that. And I think that's where we kind of meet in the middle, Marion. I think we come at things from different perspectives.
We're pretty different in our style.
And I think that's what makes these conversations really interesting, is that we're coming at this topic of leadership in pediatric allied health, to be able to, share some ideas, really keep that conversation going in this space, because it's something that I think there's a lot of interest in. And I really, I see it as a way of us having these conversations on this podcast as being able to support future leadership in this space. So we've got so much more. We could talk about leadership for hours and hours, and that's what we're bringing to you over the next few episodes of our podcast. So we would love for you to continue on this journey with us, continuing topics of conversation around allied health, leadership, and all of the things that may be relevant to you. We would love to hear what you are interested in this space. We would love for any questions that you may have. We can bring that into these conversations, and stay tuned for our upcoming episodes. Thanks for the discussion today, Marion.
Oh, such a pleasure.